Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. As you guys can see, we're here in the shop today, and yes, it is becoming a mess again, but we will get this cleaned up. Basically, what I wanted to start off with today is, you guys can see the Corvette. It is no longer on the lift. You guys can see that the arms are completely straight. Yes, there's some exhaust behind it, but we actually rolled this thing out for the first time in months. I think it's been up on the lift for at least 4 or 5 months, maybe even longer. And the reason we had to get this outside was because I had to go get some parts from the attic, as we mentioned in the last video. And what those parts were, you guys can see this is a new, to me, radiator shroud. I picked that up like a year ago, something like that. And then down here we have a driver's side fender vent. And that fender vent is basically going to be the same project that we did here on the passenger side. That is going to be replace the vent with the kit from Shane Greenwood. So we will do that off camera. You guys have already seen that video. We'll have a link to that video up above. And the reason we have a new radiator shroud is because we picked something up like almost a year and a half ago. It was 2 Black Fridays ago. And what I ordered is in this big box from Kong Performance. So let's get that out, get that opened up. And what's in this box from Kong Performance is basically going to be a big piece of carbon fiber. And you guys can see a giant air filter. And as you guys can see, this is a big new intake from Kong Performance. You guys can see little Kong Performance skull there. This whole thing is carbon fiber. And basically it's a new Ram Air Intake that they released probably 2 years ago, I think. These have been out for a little while now. Bought this on Black Friday 2 years ago, like I said. I think I saved $200 or $300, something like that. And this has basically been sitting on that shelf behind us for like the last year and a half, almost 2 years. And that is because after we got the car tuned, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years ago, I knew I was not planning on going to get it retuned until we did something about the ECU, until we did something about the fuel system and the injectors. And I was kind of thinking, I'm like, you know, if we're going to make any other changes during this time, this new 427, the Haltech ECU swap, the new injectors, the E85, it makes sense just to do this all at once. So that's why this has kind of been sitting on the shelf dormant for a couple of years. And we're going to go ahead and replace that smaller carbon fiber intake from Kong with this bigger one. And so yeah, here is the new Ram Air Racing carbon fiber intake, whatever you want to call this thing. I don't know what the actual name is, but basically I think it's the Ram Air Intake. And another reason we waited almost 2 years is because of this radiator shroud. I was having trouble finding them. I finally found one on eBay. I think I spent like 40 bucks on it. It wasn't super expensive, but finally did pick up a new one of those. And that is basically going to get a giant hole the size of this filter. So as you can see, that is a very large filter. It's going to basically get cut out on the back of that. And so the way this is going to work, the air is going to come from the front bumper, go up into this intake, and then right into the supercharger. The way we have it now, there is a hole in the radiator shroud, but that is because I had an old ZR1 intake from like 10, 15 years ago. So I picked up this new radiator shroud because I think the hole is going to be significantly larger down here, and also mine is really cut up right now with having 2 or 3 different heat exchangers in it. And so it's got a bunch of holes in the side of it that aren't filled. All right, guys, I looked through the box as well as the hardware bag. Unfortunately, no template, no instructions. So I'm going to have to reach out to Greg about this. Like I said, I've had this for quite a while, and maybe he's updated the instructions. But basically, we got our hose clamps. We're going to go on the throttle body as well as the opening on the intake. Then you guys can see the basically nuts and bolts that we got here. Then you can see these aluminum brackets with these studs sticking through it. So I think how this works is those studs and those brackets will sit on the underside of this intake. They'll pop through, and then the intake will come down over the shroud, and you will bolt the 2 holes here. You guys can see these 2 holes right here. Those will bolt through here, go through the studs, and you'll put the hardware on top. And the other thing about this swap is I may actually have to take off the front bumper. I was already going to have to take off the driver's side fender because, kind of like I said, we were still in the middle of our Haltech ECU swap. So we may have to take the bumper off and the other fender, which yeah, I don't have a lot of room in here as it is. That's going to suck. And the reason we may have to take the bumper off is because I have one heat exchanger sitting flat right here. Then I have another heat exchanger sitting up underneath this. That is the Edelbrock heat exchanger, the upgrade one that you can install with the E-Force. The ZR1 guys use it as well, so that has served us very well over the last couple of years because, you know, we had it on the E-Force, now we have it on the LS9 2650. So we've got a lot of stuff in the way. And if we're trying to take this out of there, I don't know how this will play with the heat exchangers. Plus there's tubes coming out of it. Yeah, it might just make more sense just to disconnect everything and take the bumper off. All right, guys, I'm an idiot. I didn't take the time to look inside of the intake to discover that there's a rubber coupling here as well as a document that's rolled up, and I'm assuming this is going to be our template. Included with the template was actually a set of instructions, so we really don't have to reach out to anyone. So after reading those instructions, nothing too shocking or revealing there. The one thing that I don't really agree with is Greg wants you to leave the shroud in the car and to start cutting it. Well, guys, I've actually put a hole through an air condenser here previously. When I first did the Ram Air Intake, the ZR1 like 15 plus years ago, I actually cut it with a razor blade. So all of my air conditioning went right out the hole that I put in. We tried patching it with JB Weld. Yeah, that didn't hold. So I've already put a hole through in one AC condenser. I don't want to put a hole through our aftermarket heat exchanger or the AC condenser. So we will not be doing it like that. Now, another thing to note from his instructions is you're actually going to put the intake on. They want the motor to be in the car so that you can position it correctly. And then those 4 holes that you need to drill for the studs, you mark that out with a Sharpie marker. So yeah, we might use the intake, mock it up as best we can, get our location for the Sharpie marker, and then go ahead, take measurements, transfer that over to the new shroud, and then we'll be doing all of our cutting and modification off the car. Because like I said, I've already cut the AC system once in this car. Don't want to do that again. As far as the template, pretty simple here. You're gonna line up the holes on both sides of it. The other side's underneath that coupler. Put the studs through there, drill your holes through the shroud, and then mark it up and cut it. So nothing too crazy. And you know, one thing that's going to make this a lot easier, now that I have that oscillating tool from Milwaukee that I used on the fender vent on the passenger side, we might use that for cutting out this big piece of plastic. So, oh, and one more thing, I did compare the pictures and locations of the Kong intake versus our modified ZR1 from, you know, years ago. The ZR1 cuts it way down farther, so you guys can see this lip right here. They basically want you to go all the way down. Well, with the Kong Performance, I think you're going to be about an inch up above these parts that bump up. So this is cut too far down low. And actually, this ZR1 template, it might be even wider. And so, yeah, I think that hole from the ZR1 is too far down and it's too wide. So that's another thing that's going to be different between this intake and the ZR1 that we once had. So So that is the front bumper remove. Not too complex in my case. Basically, all the hardware is either up here in the corner each side of the driver's fender, or on the bottom. And actually from back here, you guys can see the mesh inserts that we put in, the left, the center, up and down, and then the right side. You also can see the centerpiece that we put in. We just did that in a recent video. And yeah. So that's pretty much it. And what we basically got to do now is keep disassembling it. So you guys will notice the tow hook is removed. We got to remove these cooling ducts here. We got to remove the auxiliary C706 cooler. We got to disconnect the heat exchanger on both sides. So down below, also over on the passenger side. And once we get rid of all that stuff, we should be able to get this upper shroud off and get the new one in. We'll mark it, pull it back out like we said earlier, cut it, and we should be able to make a little bit more progress on this intake. So, and going back to our punch list, that is one more item we can knock off, removing the bumper. The plastic trim, I'm not going to count that until we actually remove all that stuff, including that lower radiator cooler. So, all right guys, we've made a ton of progress, but I've also made a huge mess. So the front of my car looks like it exploded. We've got one cooler there, we got a second intercooler there, we've got one old plastic trim piece, and we've got the new, to me, plastic trim piece. And that is the one we have to install and modify to fit this Kong intake. So yeah, I just wanted to show you kind of how much room this stuff takes up. I didn't realize how much, you know, all these hoses and wires and pumps and all that, especially the heat exchangers themselves, you know, just how much room that takes up. So how I did this was I basically just started disassembling the front end of the car. So I took off the C7 cooler first, got all of the plastic trim and everything that we had down here, took that all off, eventually got the lower hose of the heat exchanger disconnected, and that is a tank that it's sitting on, so there's a little bit of coolant in there. I would say maybe 1/4 of a gallon, not too much, but just a little bit in there. So even though we drained the coolant when we took the blower off, there's still stuff sitting in that lower heat exchanger as well as the bottom of the big heat exchanger. So make sure you have a catch basin for that way you can catch all your stuff. So, and yeah, so kind of like I said, I just made a path of everything down here. We pulled it all out, and actually I removed this black panel trim by removing it out the bottom, because with my car I have plenty of room. With a stock car, you should be able to do that as well with the front bumper removed. Just like I said with mine, you know, we do have a bunch of stuff down here, but once you make room and everything pulls out, you know, that little trim piece, this panel right here, pulled right out. Oh, one thing I didn't know, I did not know there were push pins on the bottom here, so make sure you pull those out. I was yanking on that thing a little bit, then I felt a push pin. I'm like, what the heck? Yeah, apparently I haven't removed this. I think the last time this was out, the body shop actually put it back in. So yeah, I don't remember that being there. So yeah, so make sure you remove the 2 plastic push pins, and this thing should drop out right out the bottom. Now the radiator shroud that we have is, I'll be honestly, it's butchered. You guys can see there's 3 holes here, there's 2 holes there on the passenger side, big hole here, big hole up there. I think that's an additional hole right there. Yeah, if this shroud could talk, it would have a couple war stories. And oh, and then obviously the giant hole up top, because we had a ZR1 Ram once installed in this car many years ago. So I need to basically replicate these 3 holes down here. I need to make this one right here a little bit bigger. One of these holes was holding up the heat exchanger, so probably that one right there that's got the fresh plastic kind of bent on it. So probably that hole there. And then on this side, really the only one we need to drill is this top mount for the heat exchanger, and then this upper radiator hose. This big one right here, that was for the old Edelbrock heat exchanger. The one with the E-Force, not that one right there, the smaller one. So we can skip that one. So we're gonna go ahead and take care of those holes later. What I wanna do now is get this new to me radiator shroud up in place. The other thing I wanted to point out, guys, this part is discontinued from Chevrolet. So if you can find one on eBay, I would almost just go ahead and buy it, because they aren't going for that much money. But if you guys have any future plans for boost, you want to install a ZR1 Ram, anything like that, these are discontinued and are a little hard to find. So I picked this up, I want to say it was sub $50. I think shipping was free. So yeah, the guy definitely got hosed on that deal, because if he sold it for 50 bucks, shipping was probably at least 20. So that literally slid in from the bottom in just a minute or two. And guys, this is a throwback. I have not seen a hole in that shroud in going on almost 20 years. Bought the car in 2007, it's 2026. So it's been 19 years since I have not seen a hole there. So that looks really weird. And that's just because when I got the car, one of the first things I did was I put a ZR1 on it, and I think the Z06 mufflers. Oh, one thing I wanted to tell you. If you guys have a ZR1 and you're watching this video, the shroud that we're cutting up, this is not a ZR1 specific shroud. This is the base model, the Z06, the Grand Sport, everything else model other than the ZR1. The ZR1 does have a specific shroud. I think the only difference between the base model and the Z06 shroud and the ZR1 is the ZR1, kind of like ours, has a bunch of extra holes drilled in it for the various lines for the pumps, the power steering, cooler. There might be something else down there. Oh yeah, the ZR1's over here. They've got that little tank that sits literally right here. So there's probably some additional holes for that. So if you are a ZR1 guy watching this video, just want you to be aware that there are differences between the base model and the ZR1 shroud. With that being said, let's grab that intake. All right guys, we have the carbon fiber intake mocked up. We've got our new to me unmodified intake shroud on the bottom there, and then we've got a coupler on the end of that. And I've actually put the throttle body back on the supercharger, and that is because you guys can see the snout is offset to the driver's side, and I kind of want to mock up and just try to get a information point, a best guesstimate of where we want to line up this intake. And unfortunately, they say to install it with the supercharger and everything in the car. Well, obviously, we don't have that option. And I don't really want to be cutting this in the car, kind of like I said. So if you guys can see, I'm going to slide this back and forth. You guys can see it slid there like an inch. So that intake has two metal slots on the bottom. I'll show you that here in a second. That basically gives you an inch of wiggle room on each way. And unfortunately, I need to kind of figure out which way this wants to favor, because, you know, I don't want to have to do this again. I don't want to have to find another shroud, take this all apart again if I put it in the wrong spot. So we're going to try to take our best guess and get this installed. So you guys can see that metal slot right there. You can see this metal slot right here. And what those line up against are those two little plastic ribs in the radiator shroud down below. So you guys can see that's like 3 inches wide. You guys can see that's probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches wide. So like I said, there's a little bit of room on each side. And so yeah, we need to try to be accurate on the final placement of this thing. All right guys, so to make sure that we get this as accurate as possible on the left and right, the front to back doesn't matter. What I mean by that is those metal cleats will run into those little plastic feet down there. So the front to back doesn't really matter. What matters in this case is the left or right. And actually, if you guys can see this upper radiator shroud, I think we got this from Quartz Performance out of Arizona. You guys can see it is actually offset to the driver's side. So maybe we'll end up using that as a guide. But if I remember correctly, when I did the E-Force, I cut it right down the middle. Then when we swapped to the Kong, I had to offset everything to the driver's side, kind of like we were saying. So if we can get a center line, that'll help us with all of our measurements. So my thought is take a center line of the blower, take a center line of the intake. You guys can see we have it mocked up down here. We also put the throttle body back on. That way everything is good to go side to side, kind of like we're saying. Take a center line of the blower, take a center line of that intake, and then do a center line of our plastic shroud here. That should give us 3 reference points on where everything needs to go. Now, if you guys had a ZR1 where you were just taking the stock intake out, removing it, putting this Kong intake in, you wouldn't have to deal with any of this. Or if I had a motor in the car, kind of like you guys can see I don't, you know, I wouldn't have to do this either. But we'll just take a little bit of time, get some measurements, and hopefully having 3 points of our center line, that'll help us offset where this needs to go. All right, guys, you'll see some painter's tape and some marks on the lid, the snout, as well as down here at the bottom of the intake. The middle of the lid, you guys can see that. Continue that forward, that is on top of the intake. You guys can see the Kong logo is offset to the right, so the driver's side. Then over here on the bottom, you guys can see 2 marks. The one with the X on the left, that is the center line going down the blower, down the snout, down the throttle body. That is center line there. And then this other mark, which is about 1 inch to the right, is the center mark of the actual intake. So this is going to be offset by about 1 inch over to the driver's side. So I'll be honest, guys, if I had a laser, that would make this so much easier than trying to line up. I used tape measure, I used a square. I just did my best, and I hope it's close enough. All right, guys, you'll see we have a piece of painter's tape on the fan shroud, the radiator, the little metal piece, and then the shroud itself. What I did was I marked the center of the shroud, drew that line all the way back. I then put the intake on here. And then what I basically did was I pushed this over to the driver's side. I lined up this center line with this center line from the supercharger lid, throttle body, and intake. Pushed it to where those are now lined up. If you guys can see down here, we have made our mark. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see that. I think we should be good. And with that lined up where it is, from where we had trimmed this from the previous Kong intake, it's gonna line up pretty much sit dead center where it was previously. So I think Kong wouldn't have changed their intake design that much to shift it left or right. They're probably gonna utilize the same footprint, and this is sitting within that same footprint. So, all right guys, now we're into the hot rodding part of modifications, and what I mean by that is we gotta cut this thing. Not the intake itself, but the hardware that comes with it. In my case, it's simply too long. I don't know what's going on. I did double check the part number between the shroud off of ZR1 as well as a shroud on the Z06 or the base model. According to Chevrolet, it's all the same part number. And what we're running into is we're running into a hardware problem. The bracket that holds the intake to the shroud, it's simply too long, and it's hitting the top of the plastic shroud on both sides. It's not just one side, it's both sides. And I did want to show you, I have this all the way down. Guys, this can't physically be pushed down anymore. It doesn't matter if you spend $25 or $2,500. You always kind of have to modify things, and I don't know why it's like that. Production variation, different suppliers of parts, I don't know. So you can see these two metal straps. These are what goes in and basically secures the intake against the shroud. Well, unfortunately, you guys can see that's too long. It's going to hit the top part right here. And same thing over here. You see that silver mark? It's going to hit the top of the shroud there too. So I thought maybe I had the intake too far up, but double checking it, everything looks fine. I don't know why that bracket is like an extra about a ½ inch, 3/4 to a ½ inch. So I'm basically going to take our brand new billet aluminum pieces, take them to the bandsaw and cut those off. So, all right, just to double check our work, I did go ahead and put the template on here. And you guys can see, even with the template on here, that bracket is sticking a ½ inch above the top there. It's sticking just about the same amount of distance here. Now, if you guys follow the dotted line at the bottom of the template, that's roughly about a ½ inch above this bottom piece that goes against the bumper. And if you look up top here, a ½ inch is not going to make up that difference. So even if our intake was sitting a little bit high, which I'm not saying it's not, it very well could be sitting a little higher than it should be, but that ½ inch doesn't make up for that extra ½ inch of material on there. So I've gotten both of the brackets cut. Like I said, we cut off about a ½ inch roughly on each one. And then you guys can see I did bevel the edges with our belt sander over there. And yeah, that took less than 5 minutes. So that wasn't a big ordeal, but if you guys don't have a belt sander or a bandsaw, you know, that might be something you want to look out for, just in case you have to do modify this. Now, this is aluminum, so the bandsaw cut right through it. All right, now that fits a lot better on both sides. This is laying pretty much flat here. It's laying pretty much flat over here on the right side of the screen. So we have the template put in there. We cut out the piece of paper, and yeah, this isn't going to be the best straight line that you've ever seen marked out, but I will try to cut it out a little bit better. All right, you can see we have the middle section cut out. It is sitting over there, and I ended up actually using a sharp razor blade with a knife, just cut it out. It ended up cutting fairly easily. So, you know, I simply just went around the box, cut it out. And then when I was finished cutting it, I actually took a file and kind of just went around each corner, around each edge, and try to file it down and get any high or low points out, as well as any sharp pieces. So this thing has been basically deburred, and we're pretty much good to go. So we are looking at the underside of the intake as well as the shroud. So if you guys are looking up under the car, and how this is going to work is basically the air is going to come out the bottom across this huge intake filter and then right up into the supercharger with, you know, all this carbon fiber on here. So yeah, they actually ended up turning out pretty well. And it looks like the cut box that they told us to cut out, it is relatively close to size and shape of the filter. So there's not a lot of overlap here. There's a little bit, but nothing huge and nothing too concerning. So, all right, here's the intake fully installed outside of the car. We got everything tightened down to the shroud. We have the hole cut that we just showed you, and yeah, so everything tightened down without any major issue. So it looks like this bottom is positioned correctly. The top, kind of like I said, going side to side. That is best as we can do without the car being fully assembled. And then up the top here, you see the Kong intake. You see some of our measurements. And then we can flip it around. You guys can see the shroud, the Ram Air intake, the filter, and then up here, right into the LS9 supercharger. So, and one thing I did want to point out, if we had not trimmed these down, there's no way that this would have fit. So I'm glad we took care of that, and it was just a quick 5-minute fix. But yeah, so everything is tightened down, and that is pretty much the gist of the Kong Performance Ram Air Intake for a C6 ZR1. I just finished putting in the intake. We got the last couple bolts tightened down, and everything looks like it's going to work real well. Overall, the intake does look shorter than the old carbon fiber box that we had in here. The, you know, that short one that the filter didn't fit really good, and the whole thing kind of like bulged up really high. This thing looks like it's going to sit just fine. And the other thing I wanted to point out was kind of like where I was saying earlier in the video, where I had cut out for the other Kong intake. This is sitting literally like right in the middle of that. So yeah, I could put a finger there, and I could have put a finger down here on the other side, and that's lining up pretty well. So, and yeah, this thing looks way better than the other one. Yes, we had that other carbon fiber intake. I did not buy that one new. I might be able to resell that one for maybe $400 or $500. I just don't know what the used market is for the C6 ZR1 intakes from Kong, because obviously they came out with this much more expensive version. And this might actually make the car run a little bit better, a little bit cooler, and actually potentially reduce turbulence under the hood. And what I mean by that is, when the old intake was sitting in here, we had this huge hole in the shroud, basically right here. And that Kong filter did not fill up this entire space. It only filled up maybe 3/4 of this hole. So we had unmetered air coming in through this corner, potentially underneath it. And if you guys watch any aerodynamic videos, you have air that shouldn't be going through there. It should be going through the radiator stack. So with this new Ram Air intake, no huge holes in there, it might actually make the car a little bit more aerodynamic and reduce drag. Now, do I have any scientific data to back that up? No. But we have eliminated, would you call it a high pressure spot or low pressure spot? It's something, one of those terms. And by hopefully closing off this unmetered air coming into the engine bay, it will help cool it a little bit better. Now let's go over here to our punch list. We've got a couple things to cross off. So we did cut the plastic trim today. We did install the plastic trim. We also installed the intake. I'm actually going to cross off the whole thing as a subject. Then bumper, I'll leave that on because we kind of got some other stuff going on. But, you know, there you go. There's, you know, 3 or 4 more things crossed off of our punch list. And if you guys look at the bottom and last page of the install instructions from Kong, it does say tuning is required. So that is kind of one of the reasons we've been sitting on this for a couple of years, is because I simply didn't want to get the car retuned. We didn't have any other mods to go with it, but now with the 427, new injectors, bigger injectors, we've got this bigger intake, we've got a lot of new stuff at dry sump. We've got a whole bunch of stuff that we have to get tuned anyway. So that's going to be it for the install video. If you guys want to follow along for the rest of this journey, the motor, I haven't talked to Ken in a bit. The motor should be, hopefully the sleeves should be done. Last time I talked to him, he was working on cutting out the old sleeves. In the previous video, I showed a picture of that. So hopefully the sleeves are in. Hopefully the bottom end is built. I think he should be well on his way with that by the time you see this video. And yeah, we'll pick it up from there. If you guys want to see that update, hit that subscribe button, turn on your bell notifications. If you guys want to help support the channel, check out all the links down below. Try to include links for everything that we used. Some of the tools, the drill, the oscillating tool, include links for that. Also, make sure you check out our website, BonecrrusherSS.com. If you guys want to find the link to that used C6 intake, we'll have that on there. Also, we've got stickers, t-shirts, hats, all that stuff's on the website, and that's pretty much going to be it. Thanks, guys. Have a great one.
Bye.